Stromberg. Years ago, I was asked to give a sacrament meeting talk in the Hyde Park Ward in Chicago. Rather than discussing a particular gospel principle or practice, I instead spoke about how I managed my belief. I described how I sorted the doctrines of the church into basically 5 categories. 1, those things I know to be true. 2, those things I believe to be true. 3, those things I don't believe to be true but am open to believing. 4, those things I don't believe to be true and am not open to believing. 5, those things I know not to be true. As far as I can remember, I did not then, nor do I now, place any belief into either the first or the 5th categories, namely those things I know to be true or untrue, as John McLaughlin would say with absolute metaphysical certainty. While I mentioned a few things in the 4th category, those things I don't believe and am not open to believing, such as in patriarchy, for example, I spoke primarily about some of the doctrines and principles of the church that I either believed or was at least open to believing. Currently, I am more tentative in my beliefs than I was then. And so for the purpose of this panel, this session, I'm going to use the word belief to mean less a statement of religious conviction or a confession of faith, and more a recital of a few ideas that I find to be spiritually and intellectually compelling. My own sense of the spiritual tends toward the intellectual rather than the mystical, and the assertive rather than the submissive. Perhaps this is why a former state president pulled up my husband's side and said, "It must be awfully hard being married to somebody who's spiritually handicapped." When informed of said statement, I quipped, "Does that mean I get a good parking sticker at church?" I have always been troubled by traditional notions of worship, more specifically by those who would have us believe in a God who demands our devotion. Now, I get awe and I get gratitude. I simply cannot conceive of a God who would even appreciate, let alone expect, adoration. Thus, if there is one tenet of Mormonism that I still find compelling, it is the radical notion of a God who wants peers. For is this not the implication of Lorenzo Snow's familiar couplet, "As man and woman is, God once was, as God is, man and woman may become," which notion I think still survives in Mormon thought, despite recent efforts to downplay it in order to appeal to mainstream Christians. So given my nearly lifelong commitment to feminism and the equitable distribution of power, it is not surprising that the idea of a God who wants to share power would be appealing to me. In a presentation at a Sunstone Symposium several years ago, Scott Barchi, a first-century scholar at UCLA, suggested that an important part of Christ's mission was to present a radical critique of traditional models of power, which were and still are based on dominance and coercion. Such models of power eventually will erode. Only power that empowers others is everlasting, asserted Lorie. This, I believe, is one of the most significant spiritual insults of my adult life. Insults? Boy, I thought it was weird. This, I believe, is one of the most significant spiritual insights of my adult life. It is informed by feminism and substantially altered the way I view myself in relation to my children and those over whom I